there are multiple dimensions of, let's say, competence and authority, multiple, especially in a sophisticated society. And so you're fortunate if you're good at one or two things. Most of the ways you could be competent and generous, you're just not that good at. So first of all, I would say don't be too disheartened, especially if you're young, because of course you're useless when you're young and male. It's like, of course you are. It's a very difficult thing to take your place in the world. And so you don't want to be disheartened because that's the situation that you're in. It's like, yeah, of course that's the situation you're in. The question is, what are you going to do about it? I was often asked by my students and my clients who didn't know what they should do with their lives. Well, I don't have any goals. I don't know what I want to do with my life. What should I do? And part of the problem is the question, what should I do with my life, is not a very good question, because it's sort of like, tell me about everything. It's just too much. What do you do with your life? Well, you say, you do many things. Okay, what are those things? Because I don't know what to do. Well, why don't we look at what other people do that appear to give their lives significance and meaning? And this bears on the issue of responsibility. Well, most people want to have or do have an intimate partner. So if you don't have one, hey, work on that. And how do you work on that? Well, you don't work on that by going to find the person that's right for you. It's like, who the hell are you? And what makes you think that even if you found the person that was right for you, they wouldn't take one look at you and run away screaming? So you might think, well, how about if I be the person that someone else would want? And so a young man has to ask himself, well, what do I bring to the table? Now, the first advantage he has is youth and possibility. And that's really something young men have over older men. Youth is not nothing. It's a real form of wealth. So if you're young and poor, you're young. And you wouldn't trade young and poor for decrepit and rich. So don't be thinking you're poor if you're young. It's an unbelievable source of wealth. And so that's an attractiveness that's there, that's built in. And then, well, then, are you good at anything? And if the answer to that is no, well, how about you start practicing being good at something? Pick one thing. Well, what? Well, not nothing. Pick something. Maybe it's a video game. I don't care. Get good at something. Because to get good at something requires you to simultaneously practice many skills that will make you good at many things. So, for example, I was a dishwasher when I was a kid at restaurants, and I was a good dishwasher. And, you might think that's a pretty low level of achievement. It's like, it's not. And I can tell you in detail why. First of all, most young people who go into restaurants to wash dishes do a terrible job. They show up late, or they don't show up at all, and then they quit after 2 weeks. Like, that's really not good. So what do you have to do if you want to be a good dishwasher? Show up on time. How about show up 15 minutes early? So if you work 10% longer, you make 40% more money. So that's worth knowing. 40% on 10%, that's a damn good return. So that's part of the reason men make more money than women on average, is because men work longer hours. And it doesn't take much extra work to produce quite a return, partly because any sensible boss is going to be looking for the person who goes the extra mile. And if you manifest signs of going the extra mile, even in a relatively minimum way, you just have to do better than the other people around you, then you're going to get disproportionately rewarded. And so what else do you have to do to be a good dishwasher? Learn the techniques. Stay on your toes. Volunteer to work when other people don't show up. Show an interest in learning to cook. Get along with the waitresses. Maybe get along with the customers. Act like an adult. And all of that's excellent practice for all sorts of things you're going to do later. I stopped being a dishwasher quite soon and started being a short order cook. And that was great because I learned to cook. I learned to clean a kitchen and to run a kitchen and to interact with the waitresses and to have fun with the cooks and to do it all and have fun, because you can have a lot of fun in a kitchen and in pretty much any working class environment. If you're working with decent people, it can be a real blast. It's not intellectual work in that you're not dealing with abstractions, although it can still be complex. That's why we don't have dishwashing robots, by the way. But it can be a real blast. And so pick something. Pick a job. Go do it. Get good at it. See if you can be like the best dishwasher they've ever had. And then you're the best at something. And then you kind of learn what it's like to be the best at something. And Imagine you're trying to be the best man you can. That's your ultimate goal. You don't even know what that is. It's going to be a whole agglomeration of a variety of high-level skills. Well, how do you start that? Well, in any domain. Maybe you play sports. Be a good teammate. Be the best teammate. Maybe you develop your skills in that particular sport and you could be the star. Well, pass to someone else now and then, and maybe take an interest in facilitating the development of your teammates so you can do that. And so develop a vision for yourself. If you could have the life you wanted, what would you have for an intimate partner, or what would you offer? What kind of family would you like to have? Can you put your own family together? Can you reconcile with your father, your mother, your brothers, your cousins? Can you pull your family together? Can you get a job or a career? Can you educate yourself? Can you regulate the draw of temptation, drug and alcohol use in particular, sexual temptation as well? Oh, do you do anything that's remotely resembling civic responsibility? Are you a member of a political party? Do you go to church? And that isn't to say that the church, for example, or a political party doesn't need repair, because all institutions are always falling apart and corrupt. That's a story as old as time. That's the evil uncle. But good, you have something to do. Go fix it up. Definition of man. What am I, a biologist? But as it happens, I am a biologist, so I guess I don't have that excuse. Productive generosity is good. I once read a good description of Christian charity, and it was productivity plus generosity, which I really liked, because the hyper empathic types only concentrate on the generosity end of that. It's like, I'm generous, yeah, but do you have any money? No, I'm generous with other people's money. Yeah, well, you're missing half the equation there. And that's really the distinction between conscientiousness and agreeableness from a personality perspective. Those are two cardinal personality traits. And agreeableness, which is basically an empathy dimension, has no correlation whatsoever with success in enterprise, business, creative domains. In fact, among managers, agreeableness looks like it's slightly negatively correlated with success, because hyper-agreeable managers can't say no. They can't discipline their employees. They can't set limits. And they're susceptible to manipulation. So productive generosity is pretty good. There is more to it, obviously, more to being a man than productive generosity. But as a central notion, that's a good one. The productivity requires aim, orientation, responsibility, discipline, all of that willingness to work, that willingness to make sacrifices, which is the hallmark of maturity in the service of a higher goal. And that responsibility, the productive responsibility, should manifest itself in relationship to the individual. So you should be responsible to yourself and your future self, the community of selves that you are across time. And then you should be responsible for and productive for as many people as you can manage. And so that might be first your intimate partner, your wife, second your parents, your siblings, your children, maybe your children primarily, although, there's a trade-off there with your wife. Then your local community, then your broader community. You want to take on all that responsibility if you can, in a sense that's both productive and generous. That gives you something to do. Justify your miserable life to yourself and everyone else. And you need to do that. It orients you solidly in the world if you do that. And it gives you a dragon to fight, a real one. And that's where the gold is. So, as everyone has known forever, and as we continue to remind ourselves, how should you arm yourself? Well, that's kind of what a humanities education teaches you to some degree. Arm yourself with words. Be precise in your language. Right? Say what you mean. Read great men and great women. Make yourself literate. Get your tongue in order. Get it under your own control. Get rid of the ums and the likes and the you knows and the pauses. And get rid of everything you say that you only say to impress other people. And just see if you can say what you believe to be true. That's an adventure. That's the thing about the truth, If you aren't speaking the truth, well, you got to ask yourself, if you're not speaking the truth, who is it that's talking? If you're saying something that you do not believe to be true, it's not you talking. It's something else. It might be the part of you that wants to manipulate, the other person into delivering what you think you want from them. Well, what is that spirit of manipulation that you've allowed to possess you? It's not you. Let's say you decide to live your whole life in that instrumental manner. You're going to craft your words like the student who says, well, I'm going to write what the professor wants to hear so I get the grade. It's like, well, you just turn yourself into that. Well, who is it that's doing that manipulating? It's not you, because those aren't your words. So even if you get the grade, it's not you that got the grade. It's the false you. It's the manipulative you. So you do that your whole life. You don't have your life. And then you think, well, God, that was a miserable life. I manipulated everybody. They were so damn stupid. They were sucked in by it. They're all contemptible. Everyone does it, which they don't, by the way. And so that's a pathway to bitterness. Partly because if you're a manipulator and you use your language falsely, you don't live your own life. You live the life of whatever possesses you when you think it's you manipulating. And so you live the life of the spirit of manipulation. And there's no difference between that in some fundamental sense and demonic possession. So if that's what you want, go right ahead. But what you miss is the adventure of your own life. Because if you say what you think, this is a really important thing to understand. You have no idea what will happen if all you do is say what you think. Because you have to let go of everything. Just to do that, you have to assume that there isn't anything better that can happen than what happens if you tell the truth, no matter what happens. Because you say, I'll tell the truth and I get in trouble. It's like, well, is that good or bad? Well, it's not so good when it's happening. When you get in trouble, that can be devastating. But in the medium term or the long term, in my situation, I've gotten in trouble plenty of times for things I've said. And many times I thought, that was fatal. That was the end. I said something or it was misinterpreted. But often I said something that I was going to get taken out. I was going to get canceled. And that was the end of my reputation. And every single time, and I hope partly because I didn't say things that I didn't think were true, every single time it switched around. And so eventually the cancellation attempt not only failed, but massively backfired. But man, living in that gap between when the pressure was on, let's say, and it turned around, that wasn't pleasant. But it's certainly adventurous because you don't know what's going to happen. And maybe that is the adventure of your life, right? Imagine that the world was constituted so that the true adventure of your life emerged as a consequence of truth in speech and action. Because that would be reflective of the real you, so it would be you living. And then imagine that the adventure that would occur if you dwelled in the truth would be so overwhelming that it would justify all the suffering. And I think that's true. The great people I know are brutally truthful to themselves and other people. And they have insanely adventurous lives. And they also get more and more and more competent. I've talked to my daughter a lot about this. My daughter runs my companies. My daughter didn't know much about business when she started, and she was pretty sick too, and she didn't know a lot. And so it was easy for people who thought they knew a lot about business to pull the wool over her eyes. But Michaela has the ability to ask stupid questions, and we've talked about that a lot. It's like, you only have to ask a stupid question once if you're alert. You ask a stupid question, and if you're in a crowd and you ask a stupid question, 80% of the people in the crowd have the same question. They're just too cowardly to ask. But you ask and then someone actually tells you, you never have to ask that question again. You're no longer stupid. So if you ask enough stupid questions because you're honest, well, then you're not stupid anymore. And so that's a good deal. So what can you arm yourself with? In Sleeping Beauty, when the prince, he's entrapped in the castle by Maleficent, who's the ultimate Oedipal mother. She transforms herself into a dragon, which everyone seems to just take as a matter of course, because of course the evil witch transforms herself into a dragon. Like, why we think that's logical is a deep question, an archetypal question. But anyways, he's armed with the sword of truth, and I believe it's the shield of virtue, but the sword of truth. And it's a corny trope in some sense, but it's not corny at all, because how could falsehood prevail against truth? How could that possibly be the case? If what is true reflects what is real, how can what is unreal prevail against what is real? And so, you might not want to align yourself with the truth, because then you will find the dragons. That's for sure, because that's the route that's direct to the dragon's lair. But if you've got the right tools, well, then you can prevail. And so what other tools? Beauty, that's great. Tradition, community, responsibility, all the classic virtues, the opposite of sin. All of that are weapons that you have in your quiver so that you can take proper aim and you can hit the target multiple times. You can hit the cross, the center of the cross, and prevail. And so when you're out to get educated, one of the things I can never understand about university professors, for example, they seem to never explain to their students why you should write. Why are you writing this essay? Well, to learn to write. Well, no. You're writing the essay to get a grade, to pass the course, to get your degree, to go on with your life. Fine. That's the pragmatic side of it. Why write? Well, maybe you're writing about something important, and if you're not, then it's just a lie, the whole enterprise. So write about something important. Why do you want to write? Well, so that you can think. That's what you're doing when you're writing. Revelation, here's some ideas I have. You do your research. Here's some ideas I have. I'll get them down. Then I'll edit the idea. So I only keep the best ideas. Well, now I know how to think about that. Now I know how to perceive that. Now I know how to act on that. Well, now you know how to perceive and act in relationship to something difficult. Well, that's why you learn to write. It's so you can think. And everyone says to their children, think before you act. Well, why? So you can not do stupid things. So why think? So you don't do stupid things. Why not do stupid things? So your life isn't any more miserable than it has to be. So don't do stupid things. How do you do that? Think. How do you learn to think? Write. So why write? How about so you can take your place in the world? Not so you can please the teacher and be some obedient, lapdog. You need to know how to think and speak so you can lead and think and conceptualize and entrance. So all those weapons of directed attention and a sharp mind. And you don't let people who are trying to make you into lapdogs, as I said before, interfere with your ability to arm yourself for what's coming in the future. So, one of the things you want to understand too, if you're a tough, cool kid, especially a guy, is that a lot of the things that are working for you in junior high, your physical prowess and that kind of physical charisma that you might have because you're a relatively tough kid, you need that as you progress. But as you move out of junior high and high school into the broader world, the spoils go to those who can master abstractions, because abstractions scale. And so you have to be able to work at a high level of abstraction in order to become really successful. And you can't get there without being literate and, numerate too, because that's another pathway. If you're more interested in things and gadgets, if you have more of the engineering mind. So, but you want to think of education as the pathway to that sharpness of mind. And you want to think about that, and tongue. And you want to think about that as your primary weapons of both offense and defense. And that's not some metaphor. That's, they say the pen is mightier than the sword. There's no comparison. The sword, yeah, fair enough. And you want to be careful of someone who wields a sword, but you wield the pen in a mighty manner. Nothing stops you ever. That's assuming too that you're oriented, in some noble manner. Oh yeah, well, the adventure. The adventure. Well, the truth is an adventure. Just try that. Just try it for a month. So you have to start by not lying. That's how you start. And so you might say, well, I'm not sure when I'm lying and when I'm not. It's fair enough. You probably aren't sure. But sometimes you know perfectly well that you're about to lie or that you just did. And so you can just start by stopping the unnecessary lies. And then you get better at discriminating. So you get rid of the blatant lies. And that means you're going to have to face a lot of detritus left over from pulling those lies along with you. You stop the blatant lies, and then you're capacity to discriminate improves. And so then you start seeing some more subtle lies. So then maybe you clear those out. And then you see even more subtle lies and you start clearing those out. And you start seeing that you say things that weaken you in your own eyes to impress other people. That's a subtle form of lie. And then maybe you stop doing that. And then maybe you do that for 5 years, as a spiritual practice. And then you only say things you mean. Well, man, you will absolutely have the adventure of your life if you do that. So, and maybe that's a great adventure, because that's one thing life could be. I don't know if you can have an adventure if you're not mortal, because an adventure sort of implies that you have everything at stake, right? And we have everything at stake. And so you can live like you have everything at stake. And that's an adventure. That's for sure. It might be so much of an adventure that you can hardly tolerate it, but it won't be dull. And that's something, because maybe you want to look back at your life and think, that was rough, but man, it was worth it. And I don't know if you ever get only one of those, because you might think, well, I can scrap the rough. I don't want, at the end of my life, that was rough. I floated through life on a cloud of pillows and nothing ever challenged or threatened me. It's like, no one wants that as their memory. What they want is like dragons, victories, dragons, victories, dragons, victories, something like that. Or beasts, tamed, beasts tamed, something like that. And so, there's a deep theological idea that, well, part of the reason that God gave us free will, let's say, is because it's better for us to come to virtue on our own accord, and it's better to have an adventure than to be safe. And maybe it is better. I mean, what do you want for your kids? Do you want them to get out there and enter into forthright combat with the world and to overcome obstacles and succeed? Or do you want to wrap them in styrofoam and bubble wrap and store them in the basement? Well, nothing will hurt them down there. Well, yeah, except you. And so you want to prepare your children, if you love them, for the adventure of their life. You don't want to protect them. And you do the same with you. It's like, you're not getting out of this alive. You're going to die. You got nothing to lose that you're not going to certainly lose. So you might as well live with no holds barred. And the fastest way to do that is to stop lying, because then it's you that's living. Because you don't know what possesses you when you lie. Like, you think they're your lies. Jung said, people don't have ideas. Ideas have people. And so when you're lying, you might ask yourself just exactly who's got your tongue. Because you think it's you, but that just shows how much you know. So I wouldn't recommend that. It's not the cat that's got your tongue. It's a hell of a lot worse than that. How should women establish which dragons they should go after and which treasures are worth attaining? That's a good question, because, you could be like Don Quixote and go after windmills. And there's something noble about Quixote, because at least he goes after something. There are at least dragons in his imagination. It's dangerous to go play in traffic. And so you might say, well, I've run out in traffic. I'm dodging cars. I'm playing chicken. Aren't I slaying the dragon? It's like foolhardy exposure to danger. It might be better than no exposure at all. There is something somewhat admirable about that kind of careless bravado that you sometimes see among young men in particular. That's sort of the Bart Simpson approach to life, better than the Milhouse approach. Neither are optimal. But mostly, the dragons that you have to encounter on your way to a worthy goal. So imagine you're trying to enter the castle gates. So you've identified the castle. You know where you're headed. You have an aim. Maybe you want to get a job. You're a young guy. You're 14. You're afraid to go for an interview. But you want to get a job. And you have an idea why. You want to make your own money. You want to be treated like an adult. You want to establish some autonomy. You want to see if you can be useful to anyone. And so you're willing to go get a job, but you're terrified of an interview. It's like, there's a dragon for you. Because you want to fight the dragons that guard the gates of the treasure that you wish to attain. And so that's not foolhardy. It's like, well, why can't I get a job? I'm afraid to be interviewed because I'm so inarticulate. Well, hey, you've got your dragon. And that has to be encapsulated within a vision of the treasure. It's like, if the treasure is worth attaining. And so you got to ask yourself, is this part of a path that I would voluntarily walk down? And if the answer is yes, then you're going to encounter obstacles, some of which might be the size of dragons along the way. And those are the ones that you have to face. And that's not foolhardy. And those are the ones that, facing those dragons, will force the development within you that's necessary to attain the goal. So, for example, if you're so inarticulate or tongue-tied or shy or embarrassed that you can't face an interview, well, then you need to get your tongue in shape. And that might take quite a while. You might have to practice interviews with a friend. You can find one that'll do it, or a teacher or a principal or another adult, and until you can do it. And then not only do you have the job, perhaps, but you know how to look for a job, and now you're articulate. And so what a deal that is. And you have to overcome your fear of your own stupidity. You know, in the story of Moses, so Moses is called upon by God to lead his people out of slavery. So that's a pretty major task. And you're called in some sense by God to lead yourself out of the slavery of your own foolishness and presumptuousness. And Moses had a speech impediment. That's part of the story. It's not clear exactly what it was, but he believed he was a very unlikely person to bear that responsibility, and I suppose he was. But one of the things you often see with people, like introverts can become extremely socially skilled if they do it consciously. You know, it kind of comes naturally to extroverts. Introverts are often worn out by people and find it draining and difficult, especially in groups. But if they go about it consciously, man, they can become incredibly sophisticated. And, you know, the same thing happens with disagreeable young men who are well socialized. They can become incredibly diplomatic because they've worried the borders so intensely. They know exactly where the rules are. Those are the dragons, you know, the ones that stand in the path that leads to the light. Those are the dragons you take arms against. And you leave the ones that you can ignore, you leave them be. You know, don't let sleeping dragons lie. Right? Because it's not foolhardiness that you're looking at. What are the treasures that you can get? Well, the first thing dragons guard is virgins, so there's that. And you think, well, it's a very bizarre story, right? The story of the dragon, because dragons guard gold and virgins. It's like, what interest do dragons have in gold and virgins? But, well, the girl wants the guy who can overcome the dragon. So that's dead simple and obvious to anyone with even a smidgen of biological knowledge. Of course, women are going to be, what would you say, entranced by the man who can keep the predator away from the infants. I mean, clearly, that's of primary significance. So if you can confront the dragon, you get the girl. And that's how, God only knows how old that story is, like millions of years old, that idea. Tens of millions probably, but certainly millions. And then gold, well, depends on the dragon, you know. If you're afraid of interviews, afraid of public speaking, and you overcome that, you get the gift of a golden tongue. Well, that's something. And so there's a commensurate gain with each obstacle overcome that's in proportion to the size of the obstacle. It's partly because a lot of the potential that lies within you will not make itself manifest without the demand being put to it. And so there's this old idea in the Chartres Cathedral, there's a maze. It's the world, essentially. You enter in one quadrant of this circular maze, in the center of the church architecture, and you walk every quadrant. And at the end of the walk, which is a symbolic pilgrimage, you get to the middle, to the center where you're supposed to be. And what that means is that to get to where you should be, you have to go everywhere. And That's why young men often, and young women as well, are called to, they want to travel. They want to go see the world. Well, why? Because they want to get away from their father's tent and their mother's love and go hit themselves against the world to see different things, to become different, to become a multitude of different people, and then to integrate all that into the person they could be. And you have to go everywhere and do everything to manage that, to every corner of the world. And every time you do that, you gain more information, but you turn things on inside of you that you don't even know are there. And that's the same as reactivating the ancestral father. It's the same thing. Because all that biological capacity is in some sense nested inside you, maybe coded at the genetic level. We know that if you stress yourself in particular ways, especially voluntarily, new genes turn on and code for new proteins. Like you literally build new modules. They're there in latent form. It's not much different than, when you go to the gym and you start lifting weights, well, your body's going to transform, but it's not going to do that if you just sit around. You have to face your being with the necessity of transformation, and then all sorts of new things that you had no idea you were capable of will make themselves manifest. And that's all part of that pattern of voluntary confrontation. That's the core of genuine adventure.